Greetings and welcome to Marah Talks History. I have been researching about the history of medicine and the important figures who contributed to this field, and I found that Abu Bakr Al Razi, whom is nicknamed Father of Arabian Medicine, is one of the most praised figures in the history of medicine. Abu Bakr Al Razi is praised the most by historians, despite there being many other great physicians in history like Hippocrates, Joseph Lister, Ibn Sina, Edward Jenner, Andreas Vesalius, and many more. So why all this praise towards Abu Bakr Al Razi? I decided to research more about his contributions to the field of medicine and conclude why Abu Bakr Al Razi is the greatest physician in history. The largest and most important of Abu Bakr Al Razi's medical works is his book titled Kitab al-Hawi fi al-Tib, commonly known by its Latin name Liber Continens, is a collection of notes that Abu Bakr Al Razi made while reading about the opinions, diagnoses, and method treatments made by the Roman and Greek physicians, to which Al Razi either debunked or authenticated through his own experiments, discoveries, observations, and method treatments throughout his medical experience. For example, the most well-known one, which is most of the time sold in a separate book, is his Ash-Shukuk ala Jalinos, or as known in English as the Doubt on Galen, in which Al-Razi criticized some of Galen's theories, in particularly his theory of the four separate humors, the liquid substances that include blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and dark bile. According to his theory, the balance of these humors was thought to be the key to health as well as natural body temperature, and the dysfunction of any of them can result in diseases such as melancholia or leprosy. Al-Razi refuted this claim by stating that a warm drink would heat up the body to a degree much higher than its natural temperature by triggering a response from the body, rather than transferring only the drink's warmth or coldness to it. Another example on his doubt on Galen is the treatment of the at the time considered the hopeless disease, leprosy. Galen suggests snake flesh and theriac as a remedy through stories and legends, then mentions his own experience, and this treatment was at the time found in Greek, Arabian, and Latin pharmacopoeia. Abu Bakr Al Razi wrote, "The ancients have claimed that snake flesh and theriac made from it can heal of leprosy, but I do not have such experience, even though its reputation is famous." Al-Razi then suggests an effective treatment to counteract leprosy, however, only during the first stage of the disease. Abu Bakr Al Razi's challenge to the fundamentals of the medical theory of the time was considered very controversial, to which he was accused by many of ignorance and arrogance. Even though Abu Bakr Al Razi shows his gratitude to Galen, he wrote, "I pray to God to direct and lead me to the truth in writing this book. It grieves me to oppose and criticize the man Galen, from whose sea of knowledge I have drawn much. Indeed, he is the master and I am the disciple, although this reverence and appreciation will and should not prevent me from doubting, as I did, what is erroneous in his theories. I imagine and feel deeply in my heart that Galen has chosen me to undertake this task, and if he were alive, he would have congratulated me on what I am doing. I say this because Galen's aim was to seek and find the truth and bring light out of darkness. I wish indeed he were alive to see what I have published." Despite this praise, Al-Razi was a firm believer of using one's reasoning and logic, especially in medicine and philosophy, as these two fields always require new ideas, approaches, and improvements. He wrote, "In medicine and philosophy, blind obedience and surrender to authority is unacceptable, and imitation is not wisdom, but that reason and logic must guide one's thoughts, and Galen himself had chastised those who attempt to impose their opinions on their students without reason or logic. Because of this book and the ideas surrounding it alone, many historians consider Abu Bakr Al Razi the greatest medical doctor of the Middle Ages. Al-Razi was the first physician to describe in detail the symptoms of smallpox and measles, which he based it off on his clinical examinations. He was the first to recognize and differentiate smallpox and measles as two different diseases by using the method known as differential diagnosis. In his book Kitab al-Judari wal-Hasba, the second chapter deals on which bodies are more susceptible to get either of the two diseases and the times of the year in which the spread of the diseases is more common. In the case of measles, he says that bodies which are dry, thin, and hot are more susceptible to this disease, and it occurs more commonly in extreme dry and hot summers and when it doesn't rain in autumn and the weather is dry and hot. However, cold, thin, and dry bodies are not susceptible for either of the diseases, but if an individual is infected with smallpox, the disease will not have a harmful effect on the individual. In the case of smallpox, it is more widespread at the end of autumn and the beginning of spring. The most important chapter of the book being chapter 3, in which Abu Bakr Al Razi talks about the symptoms of smallpox and measles. Al Razi emphasizes that smallpox is different from measles. He says that there are common signs for the two diseases and other more specific signs for each one of the diseases, which helps the physician greatly in making a differential diagnosis between the two diseases. He declares the most common signs between smallpox and measles are nose itching, chest pain, fever, redness in eyes and cheek, cough, headache, breathing difficulties, sore throat, hoarseness, and in some cases syncope. Al-Razi states that it's not necessary for all of the symptoms mentioned to appear at the same time, as some may be absent. He also mentions that the specific symptoms that differentiate between smallpox and measles is that syncope, distress, and anxiety is more prominent in measles, while back pain is more severe in smallpox. In the other chapters of the book, Al-Razi describes the respective treatments for smallpox and measles. Kitab al-Judari wal-Hasba is considered the first of its kind. Al-Razi is credited as the scholar who differentiated and recognized for the first time in the history of medicine between smallpox and measles and described them separately in detail. However, unlike Greek and other Arab physicians who came before him considered the two diseases as one disease, French polymath Gustave Le Bon, in his book The World of Islamic Civilization, recognized this priority. In 1970, the World Health Organization credited his work by saying his writings on smallpox and measles show originality and accuracy, and his essay on infectious diseases was the first scientific treatise on this subject. One of the characteristics of Al-Razi was that he wanted everyone to have access to some sort of medical care. Al-Razi wrote and dedicated the book Man la yahtaruhu al-tabib to the poor, travelers, and normal citizens when a doctor was not available to them. In order to guide them, he describes common illnesses and symptoms such as melancholy, colds, coughs, headache, as well as diseases of the eyes, ears, and stomach, and their respective prescription diets and medicines to which one can treat themselves to. The book is also known as Tibb al-Fuqara, which means medicine of the poor, due to the reasoning behind the publication of this book. In regards to the history of pharmacy, this book is considered as the first home medical manual, considering the fact that other books of similar nature came after Al-Razi. While Al Razi is nicknamed Father of Arabian Medicine, he has another nickname which is Father of Pediatrics, as he was the pioneer of dealing with pediatrics as an independent medicine field, due to the fact that treating children in a different way than adults was a bit weird during the time of Al Razi. His book رسالة في طب الأطفال والعناية بهم, commonly known by its Latin name Practica Puerorum, was the first ever monograph about pediatrics as an independent medicine field. He also was a pioneer in pediatric neurosurgery, even though he was mostly a pediatrician. He dealt with many children with hydrocephalus. He sought to improve treatment and knowledge of this condition. He underlined removing bone fragments in depressed and separated fractures of the cranium, along with the protection of the dura. Unlike many physicians at the time, Abu Bakr Al Razi considered mental health as an important contributor to a person's health. He completely rejected the idea of the mind-body dichotomy and was a huge advocate that mental disorders should be considered and treated as seriously as any other medical condition. When he was working as the director of a hospital in Baghdad, Al-Razi introduced the first ever concept of psychiatric wards as a place to care for the mentally ill. He conducted extremely detailed clinical observations of his patients with psychiatric conditions. He introduced psychotherapy and used it in a primitive but dynamic form. He included other treatments such as occupational therapy, diet, baths, medication, music therapy, and aromatherapy. In his books, he offered many explanations for plenty of mental illnesses that were rampant throughout society at the time. He outlined symptoms, differential diagnosis, and treatments for many different mental illnesses, such as his practice of an early form of cognitive therapy for obsessive behavior. Al-Razi also described depression as a melancholic, obsessive-compulsive disorder, which is triggered when there is a change in the blood flow in the brain. His works on psychology and psychotherapy got him the nickname of the father of psychology and psychotherapy. Some of Abu Bakr Al Razi's other achievements include: he was the first to introduce animal trial studies to examine the effects and toxicity of certain drugs before administering to humans, comparing the outcome of patients with meningitis treated with bloodletting and the ones without to determine if bloodletting could help. His contribution to pharmacy by compiling texts. He introduces the use of mercurial ointments, as well as his development of apparatus such as mortars, flasks, files, and spatulas, which were in use until the early 20th century, and his writing of over 200 books in fields such as medicine and philosophy. Al-Razi was a firm believer in medical ethics. He wrote, "The doctor's aim is to do good, even to our enemies, so much more to our friends, and my profession forbids us to do any harm to our kindred, as it is instituted for the benefit and welfare of the human race, and God imposed on physicians the oath not to compose mortiferous remedies." He attacked and ridiculed fake doctors and charlatans who would roam around cities selling fake cures and nostrums. He also warned that even highly educated doctors could not cure or heal all illnesses, which is why he advised practitioners to be on the lookout for advanced and new knowledge by continuously studying new information whenever they could. Al-Razi had set a distinction between curable and incurable diseases, believing that the physician should not be blamed when he could not cure a patient in the case of incurable diseases such as leprosy and cancer. Ending it on a humorous note, Al-Razi wrote that, "I feel great pity for physicians who took care of princes, nobility, and women because they did not obey the doctor's order to restrict their diet or get medical treatment, thus making it most difficult being their physician." This man does not realize how His statement is very much true till now.
علماء المسلمين لولاهم في العالمين.
Al Razi was a firm believer that physicians should establish good relationships with their patients. He believed that physicians should be modest, soft-spoken, and gentle when communicating with their patients to ease any anxiety of receiving bad news. Al Razi also spoke of the importance of communicating with the patients on a personal level rather than just making them aware of their illnesses. Al Razi wrote, "The physician, even though has his doubts, must always make the patient believe that he will recover, for the state of the body is linked to the state of the mind." Al Razi would use cheerful expressions and encouraging words to instill the hope of recovery in his patients for the sake of their mental health. Al Razi was also very generous with his patients, paying for their treatments, as he believed that no matter whether rich or poor, everyone must have access to health care. Abu Bakr Al Razi's achievements concludes that he was ahead of his time and a great pioneer for the medical field. Many of the reasons why we have the advanced health and mental care that we most of the time take for granted can be traced back to Al Razi's experiments, observations, and discoveries. People of all backgrounds praised Abu Bakr Al Razi. Sir William Osler, a Canadian physician, said, "Medicine was lost and so Hippocrates founded it, dead and so Galen brought it to life, scattered and so Al Razi combined it, incomplete and so Ibn Sina completed it." Georges Sarton, a Belgian-American chemist, historian, as well as founder of the field of the history of science, said in his book published in 1927, titled Introduction to the History of Science Part 1, From Omeros to Omar Khayyam, that Abu Bakr Al Razi is the greatest physician of Islam and the Middle Ages. German author Sigrid Hunk, in her book titled Allah's Son over the West, she regarded Abu Bakr Al Razi as the greatest physician in mankind. And British Iranologist Edward Granville Brown considers him as probably the greatest and most original of all the Muslim physicians and one of the most prolific as an author, to name a few. Did you really think I finished listing all the praise towards this man? Oh no, because when I said everybody praises this man, literally everybody praises this man. And not only is he praised in literature, the Razi Institute in Karaj and the Razi University in Kermanshah in Iran were named after him. And also in Iran, every August 27, a Razi Day, also known as a Pharmacy Day, is celebrated to commemorate him. And a scholars' pavilion placed in the Central Memorial Plaza of the Vienna International Order, which was a gift from Iran in 2009, features the statues of famous Persian scientists Abu Rayhan al-Biruni, Omar Khayyam, Ibn Sina, and of course Abu Bakr Al Razi. And despite being a Muslim historical figure, within the Princeton University Chapel there lies a stained glass window which was made to commemorate him, and his image was planned even before the chapel itself was built. His achievements in the medical field speaks for itself. It is matched by no one, and no physician in history is as praised by historians as much as he is, and that concludes why Abu Bakr Al Razi is the greatest physician in history.